It is the Rotoballer PGA show, and we are 2 minutes late, but if you're in the right situation, that's never the worst thing. And you know what? We've got a great little combination going on to this week. It's a terrible field, so to speak, from an odds perspective, but DFS, these are the weeks, Spencer, that you kind of want to dive into the deep end and kind of figure out where we want to go. How are you, and what are your thoughts on this week?
I'm doing well, Byron. I agree with you on your sentiment for DFS. I always feel like when you get events like this, there is going to be, and we'll find this out over the next 24 to 48 hours, but there's usually ownership that trends in certain directions in events like this. And, you know, when you have a tournament where it's Scotty and Xander and all those names at the top and they end up breaking the slate every single week, that is one thing. This to me is not the same example. There is no Scotty in this field. There's going to be ownership that is justified where there is chalk, and there's going to be ownership where if we can avoid the pitfalls, there's an edge to be found. So, you know, it's a very, I'm going to say, interesting course here. There's not much to it. This is the reason why Eric Van Rooyen in the one attempt last year won it at nearly 30 under par. But there's different ways to build this model, and I do think that there's outlooks that we can take that can be varying from most other people in the space.
Yeah. And, you know, I was kind of going through my placement bets because, you know, as you guys know, that's like my best strength that I have in the golf space. And I was just sitting here just thinking, Jesus, I'm going to just play a lot more DFS this week because I don't want to bet any of these dudes. The odds are gross. We've got a 120-man field, but we're in Mexico at a birdie fest where some skill sets are completely nullified. So it just turns putting into a complete lottery. We're not salty about this. The models are broken. We're going to get into it, Spence. But I just completely taken around the green play out of my model entirely.
Yeah, I've done the same exact thing. There was a 0% weight that I had when you have an 80% GIR percentage. And, you know, when I built this last year and we had absolutely no data to pull from, when you look at this course, the very first thing that I saw from flyover viewpoints of it, and my thought process has changed this season. Like, full disclosure, I didn't have a good tournament here last year. When I built my model, I saw these 60-yard wide fairways where there's really nowhere you can miss. And I thought distance would be advantageous. And at the end of the day, there is a prerequisite where distance is going to help. But you kind of hit it on the head right there, where this is a course where you have really large greens. That's one of the reasons why you get to an 80% GIR percentage. You need the ability to avoid three putts, make putts at a birdie fest, and you do need to dial in some of those proximity numbers. So this model for me has a lot more weight this go around with putting and approach play than it does anything else. I have the 0% weight, as I said, on around the green. I have probably more of a weight than I planned on running initially for off the tee, but it's built in a different way. So it took a ever so slight advantage of distance over accuracy. But what I wanted to find is, how do players perform when they get these really wide open fairways? How do they perform at these easy scoring courses off the tee? Not as much weight as I normally would have in off the tee, but, you know, when you get greens here that are large, they're going to be slower with this paspalum surface. There are corollary data point trends that we can pinpoint from the past. So that's one of the things that I did in my model this week, Byron. We were kind of talking about it before the show started. There's a certain player for me as a teaser here that is outside of my top 50. That is one of the favorites in this tournament. So I think that'll be a fun conversation to have when we get there. But otherwise, I mostly agree with you. I think the head-to-head market might end up presenting something just because of some of the fade potential, but DFS wise is probably where I prefer for this event.
Yes, we will be leaning into DFS. Breaking 100 will be breaking $50, maybe breaking the Pope's bread. Who the heck knows? But let's dive into our top 10 rankings, Spencer. We've got some nice overlays for you folks. I have to click a few buttons to get us looking shiny, but we appreciate you guys for getting in here. We will also be sure to send our models to the people that commented in the YouTube after the go live, who chose the guy that finished closest to DFL. I think there were a few comments. We'll go, and Spencer and I will try and find a way to contact you guys. If not, we'll make good with you guys going forward. But as always, feel free to drop in the comment section once the show is done going live. who you think is going to finish DFL this week in Mexico, who's going to have too many margaritas, who's going to have too many burritos walking around their place. It's a cut event, Spence, right? We're going to have cuts that we're going to have people missing cuts and vacationing with their family for the full weekend still.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All righty. So let's get into the top 10 rankings here. We've got 5 or 6 guys we really want to chat about. The rest are kind of all kind of, we're not going to have that big of an edge on what we kind of anticipate the field going with too. So we're going to start off with Spencer's number 10 ranked golfer, 10th ranked golfer, and go from there. So you've got Doug Gim all the way over here, Spence, in the 10 hole. Anything you want to chat about Doug Gim? I feel like he's 6th in DK pricing. I feel like he hasn't really presented as much. You know me, I'm always going to say he lacks the upside outside of the TPC Summerlin second place finish. But anything positive or negative you want to say about Doug Gim quick?
I've been very positive about Doug Gim for what feels like probably this entire year, but specifically in this last month. I talked about TPC Summerlin in Vegas. Should have won that event. Wrong wave of the draw there. Ends up losing by 1 shot. Goes to the Zozo, puts up an admirable performance, ends up kind of putting himself too far back initially and worked his way up a little bit after that. The one thing I noticed with Gim in my model, and I guess my biggest concern would come down to this. For the first time in a very long time, there were those negative trajectory marks that you more so talk about with him. You need to make putts here. Doug Gim is a negative trajectory mover in my model for strokes gained putting. The other problem is for as great as the weighted proximity is for him in my model, he's inside of the top 5 of that category. One of the things I ran was high-end proximity and high-end putting. So what that answer would mean is high-end proximity is the ability to create opportunities from the specified distances where you're going to get your best scoring opportunities. High-end putting would be the ability to make those putts once you give yourself the opportunity. Gim is not troubling necessarily in that area, but he did drop to 25th overall. So for me, this is a relatively safe target on the board where it's lacking some of the upside. I think his price is too expensive at the end of the day. I'd be curious to see where ownership lands, but from what we've gotten from him performance-wise, I'm probably going to be lower on him than the market.
Yeah, I've got him 11th for safety, 19th for upside. So that's kind of my opinion on him. I think he's a fantastic cash game play. If you want to kind of start your lineups with him, he's going to likely make the cut because of that prestigious ball striking he does present. So we'll see what he can get up to. Over here for 10th in my model, we have got Jonathan Vegas, who also is presenting a weird scenario here where he hasn't really done much. He's a similar prospect to Doug Gim. Very safe, great ball striker. But my thing that I like most about Vegas is if you just remove some around the green play, he rockets up the leaderboard. Yeah, he's a good par 5 scorer. Like him a lot in this department. I think we'll see where he can find himself. He's DK 13th. I've got him 4th for safety over there. Not a bad play for a 10th ranked golfer. You've got Neil Shipley, number 9, Spence. He's been playing the PGA Tour of Americas. There's not that much we can kind of go off of. A fantastic golfer as an amateur looking to, I think he has to finish. I shared it on my Twitter. There's a Neil Shipley watch Rob Bolton does where you got to try and figure out where Neil Shipley has to finish this week in order to get his tour card back on FedEx Cup points because he had a really good start to the year. So anything you want to add on Neil Shipley?
I think the price tag is too cheap. The one thing I will say though is I've been doing this a lot in my model recently, and it's something that I share over in my article at Rotoball, or the DraftKings article that's free for everybody to read. And it's hit the last 2 winners of like the 5 to 10 names that ends up landing in this area. And one of the things I'm trying to find is how does a player project to perform for a specific course versus how he's actually been performing at other courses. So there are positive movers, which is where we've seen the last 2 winners that have popped up on that list. And then there's negative movers that are golfers that might have decent form, but the results for this course don't look quite as great. Neil Shipley is not a problem necessarily, but he does move in the wrong direction in that area. That would be the negative answer to that for a golfer that at the end of the day is 7,700. Curious to see where ownership lands. It's kind of more of an answer than I expected to even give for him because I'm kind of indifferent right now of where this is. It's the safety numbers like him more than the upside data would in my sheet, but I think he's a good young golfer that does, at the end of the day, have real upside to him. We'll just have to see where that exactly lands.
If you've just watched enough golf this year, you know Neil Shipley has any potential to finish inside the top 10. You know, fantastic golf at the US Open, at Augusta. Speaking of, he is one of the few people in this field that we can compare Augusta golf course to as a comp course when it comes off the driving side of things, potentially a few iron shots. Once you get to the greens, it'll be a little bit of a different situation. Another course I did want to mention as a comp, Spence, is the Black Desert last week. What do you think about I love the fact that we get a course that's yes, we don't have Mexican vegetation. We had lava, but it's wide ass fairways, big greens that you can hit quite easily. And then it's recent as well, so everyone that's playing this week also played there. So not that it's a be all end all, but if you're looking for some tiebreakers or things like that, I love the Black Desert Championship in Utah as a comp course that you can get a decent sample of these golfers playing this week who played there a few weeks ago. So
yeah, it's an easier version of that. At least at the Black Desert course, you had the ability or the negative ability to find lava at any given point. Here, exactly. It's 60 plus yard averages. Like there's water on one hole. There's unfortunately, Byron, like I wrote this in my article, it's resort style courses are never going to be something that I enjoy watching, but this venue even gives resort style courses a bad name.
Yeah.
You can't have 90% fairway accuracy, 80% GIR percentage, winning scores that are trickling into the 30 under par range, give or take. And then, you have 2 really easy par 4s, 4 extremely easy par 5s, to the point where on the par 5s, it's a 1-year sample size, I don't want to look too much into it. It was actually a negative of how easy they were. Like normally when you go and you grade par 3, par 4, and par 5 scoring, when you have 4 par 5s, there's such a massive increase that takes place in the projection where you have to score on those holes. And obviously you still need to score on those holes. And if you don't, you're out of the tournament, but it's not even as impactful because everybody is doing it at the end of the day. When we're talking about it makes a difference for who's going to win the golf tournament, but it's just too easy of a course.
Yeah, it turns it into a literal putting lottery, like we've discussed. So, but we can try and navigate that one way or another as best we can. And I just figured out why there was one random line that we didn't have in the screen here. I've got Lucas Glover sitting number 9 here, not too different from 7th in the DraftKings pricing over there at all. So nothing too crazy to chat about. I have bet Lucas Glover plus 110 for a top 20 at a golf course like this. He's playing some good golf. He finished inside the top 20, basically 1 in every 3 starts. So there's your first bet of the day for us. Spencer in the 8 hole has Eric van Rooyen, the reigning champ. I believe I will be chatting about EVR a little bit more, Spence, as we go along with the show. And we can dive into my 8th ranked golfer, who is Matty Schmidt. We can chat about him when you get to him at some point, potentially. Let's chat about your first yellow box, though, because these are the guys we really want to chat about. 13 minutes into the show, we've got Daniel freaking Berger sitting here in the 7 hole for Spencer in his model.
I came very close to wanting to punch an outright ticket on him. I didn't ultimately get there because I've looked at your card, and my card is very similar to yours, to where I think both of us took this high-end approach. I know this is a watered-down tournament, and there's some gross prices at the top, but one of the things that I noticed in my model when I was projecting and simulating it out is that these names that were near the top, it's the 2 guys that you have that I don't even have on my card. It's the 3 names I have. There's a handful of other options that enter the mix. Those were the options that were most likely to get themselves to 25, 26, 27 under through all of those simulations. And I understand that answer is always going to be the case when we're looking at a betting board. There's a reason why those are the names that pop up. But I had a weaker bottom part of the slate that really showed a difference for me. So it's one of the reasons why I attacked the top. And unfortunately for Berger in this position, he ended up missing my outright card, even at the price that he's at. You can get him at 50 to 1, but even with that, I still ran out of room on it. The thing I really like about Daniel Berger this week, if you're trying to find a positive, 91st in my model over the past year in strokes gained putting. We know that the putter is always a problem. The ball striking through spurts of this year has looked incredible. If you look at specifically comp courses and comp green complexes that we're going to get like this week, he's 31st in my model on slow greens. He's 45th in my model on that high-end putting that I was talking about. He's 45th in my model in overall weighted putting. It's not a top 10 or top 20 return, but when all of a sudden we're saying Daniel Berger is in the top third, give or take, of the field, there's a big difference that can be had for a golfer that is going to create just about as many opportunities as anybody in this tournament. And if that can equate to more putts getting made, I think Daniel Berger here ends up being a really nice upside play, to where if I'm trying to either play him in GPP contests, top 10 sort of bets, outright markets, that's the avenue I want to be approaching him. I still don't trust the safety. The floor is going to be much lower than a lot of these names that we're going to discuss, but we know at his very best, and it's not even the answer of why I'm giving this, but we do know at his very best, he is one of, if not the best players in this field. So I thought Berger was a very interesting candidate to consider, who had a lot of upside in my sheet.
Amen, dude. And, I've got him ranked right around DK at 26th, 27th, safety upside. So you've obviously got some nice metrics that your model's liking about him. And this is the whole point. This is why DFS this week is Berger's not going to provide you with safety to bet on him in a passive aggressive way, which I always mention on the shows. Like betting is where I'm passive aggressive, where I calculate and kind of lean on my edges. DFS, I'm aggressive. There's no passiveness about playing DFS for me. So I love that, Spence. When you have an edge, you lean the hell into it. Computer isn't letting me click. As you can see there, the blue wheel of death is going to be spinning. But Spencer, here we go. Okay, we are back on track. I've got EVR sitting down here. I guess we wanted to chat about him a touch. I love him this week. He's obviously 7th in my upside model. The fact that you can just remove his around the green play, which is 47th in this field, it's a 120-man field, remember, people. And we've got guys by the name of, Billy Walters is playing this week, is he? Or who is the other guy? Billy Andrade. Who the hell's that dude?
Billy Walters is playing this. We have bigger problems on the legitimacy of what's going to be bet on this tournament.
I know. So Billy Walters is not indeed playing as Billy Andrade, but hey, you get the point here. There's some sketchy situations going on over here. But EVR, if you can think of another comp course I had, was TPC Craig Ranch, where it's kind of easy scoring, relatively wide open fairways, or at least you can miss them quite nicely, and then just a decent amount of long irons, but still with lots of birdie opportunities, which I think is a great way to compare the two. TPC Lee, KH Lee has played well there. EVR is a guy that I'm kind of looking to lean on this week. I think he hasn't necessarily been playing the best entering the week, but if I take a look at all of these comp courses and things, he's 22nd in my comp course model. So, I'm a big fan of what's going on there, which also includes Vedanta out in Mexico. It includes, let me take a quick look here and tell you where my comp courses were. It was TPC Craig Ranch, the Congaree Golf Course, and then the Black Desert from last a few tournaments ago. So those are the kind of ways I'll be looking to kind of identify some golfers this week going forward. EVR, definitely a guy I'm looking to play at $8,600. There's a nice upside edge there for me going forward.
Give me 1 minute to just expand on that, because
Absolutely.
I think you brought up a lot of interesting things there with EVR. So he's even worse in my model. He's 80th in strokes gained around the green. We both have talked at numerous times, 18 minutes into the show, all the reasons why we have removed around the green from our weight. The other thing I just want to mention very quickly is I keep talking about golfers that are expected to be better performers on this course than the recent form that we've gotten. There's a reason why Eric Van Rooyen won this tournament last year, and you see it in the data points. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to put it together. I understand the trending form that we've gotten from him leaves a lot to be desired. 41st in my model over the last 24 rounds when I took a very generic approach to this when looking at off the tee approach and putting. He's 9th when I weighed it specifically for this course. I think that's where this upside and this interest for me comes into play. Another golfer to where I would say the floor, even with everything we've talked about, is going to be a little bit lower, but I do like his ceiling here. And this is a player that I am going to try to get exposure to in different ways.
Let's go. I love it. There's a reason he won this thing, and he's got a lot of sentimentality around this golf course. He won this tournament, a week or two before his best buddy passed away. Maybe he comes back and he's firing. Emotion can do a lot for you. So speaking of emotion, we've got some additional motion in the intestines of Maverick McNeely out in Japan after his WD, after some sushi. Spence, why is he your 6th ranked golfer?
McNeely's the prime example, and I bet him at the Zozo Championship, and he pulled out of the tournament. And I've had exposure to him in Vegas like quite a bit recently. And if you look at the results, they've been truly horrific. But the one thing I think it does for DFS is you have a withdrawal because of illness, which I think the illness part is the key to this. This is not an injury. We know that McNeely has been suffering from injury for the last year plus, it feels like, give and take. He's finally, in my opinion, had gotten himself back to some return when he played the Vegas tournament. He shot himself up the leaderboard over the last couple of days there. McNeely is the ultimate boom or bust target. It's the answer I keep going to with a lot of these names for DFS, but number 1 in my model for weighted scoring, number 1 in my model for high-end production when you're looking for proximity and putting, number 2 in my model when looking at a course-specific outlook from putting, off the tee, and approach play. He fits and checks all the boxes that I would like to see this week. It's not going to come without some concerns of everything that we've gotten from him recently. The last time I did a show with Nick Bretwish, like when I gave him all the reasons why I liked him out in Vegas, Nick's answer to me was, I think McNeely might be broken. And there's definitely some realistic possibility that that is the case. But you're going to see McNeely the entire week be a sharp mover in the betting market, a sharp mover in matchups. The statistics absolutely love him, and it doesn't always equate to high-end success, but he is one of those golfers that is very similar to that Van Rooyen build that I'm looking for, to where if he puts the pieces together, his A-plus game is higher than pretty much anybody else's A-plus game that I have in my sheet for how he's able to reach those upside totals. So I'm going to play McNeely in any of those types of markets. I'm going to avoid him for safety spots, but this is going to probably be a situation at that price tag that I assume I am going to be higher than market consensus on him.
I will be right there with you, Spencer. I had a top 20 bet on him at the Zozo. Things were looking solid-ish, like it wasn't looking terrible until he withdrew. When someone withdraws and they're playing well, it's usually an illness to some degree. You can feel a bit better about that than an injury, unless your name is Hideki Matsuyama, who also let me down in a big, big way. In Japan, he also let down his people. I hope he feels great about that. All right, Ben Griffin. I might as well just mention him a touch here. I bet him in the without market. I dropped that in the Rotoballer Discord this morning. I'm not entirely sure if that's still even out there. The odds at FanDuel were the exact same in the without Maverick McNeely, without Max Griesemann, without Cameron Young and somebody else. Bo Hostler, was it? But whoever the 4 people were for the withouts, the market was the exact same. So we jumped on the 25-1 there. I felt like that was a great opportunity to potentially win 2 outrights in the same week if I cashed my other guy. That would be a fun way to end the week. I won, the EVR outright here last year. So feeling some good vibes with Ben Griffin. Great ball striker. I love the fact that these fairways are going to be massive for his inaccuracies off the tee. I think you can totally diminish the accuracy situation here off the tee, Spencer. Unless you're hitting it horrifically skew, then you're going to have some troubles. But again, Griffin provides you with one of those skill sets that is completely nullified. Accuracy off the tee and around the green play don't necessarily need to be in your model this week, if you're asking me. That's why I think Benny G is the guy for me. So let's go on to my 5th ranked golfer and my 4th ranked golfer, who's JJ Spahn, number 5 for me. And in the 4 hole, I have got Keith Mitchell, who I will be betting a top 20 on as well. Will not be playing him in DFS. He does not live inside the top 10 at all. I said in a tweet that Keith Mitchell has this luxury penthouse somewhere between the 11th and 20th floor of leaderboards, and he loves just cozying it up there, Netflixing and chilling and having a good time. So I'll be leaving him out on DFS. I will be betting him in the top 20 market. If you have anything to say about Ben Griffin in the 5 hole, Spencer, you have 2 sentences. If not, I can go to the 4th hole.
I think you elaborated on it pretty well. He's a very safe target that's inside of the top 10 in a lot of the key metrics that I was looking for this week.
Hey, look at that. What a succinct answer from you. Any additional messaging from Matty Schmidt's side of things? I feel like you could probably chat a bit more about him since he's a little higher up, yeah.
Give me a couple sentences, I guess, for this one over what we did. I think it's going to depend for Matty Schmidt what you want to believe in here from a data perspective. So number one in my model in non-weighted recent off the tee plus approach plus putting. So that means that if you just take those three categories, don't gear it for this course, he is the best player of the trending data that we've seen. And that really shouldn't be that big of a shock. 3rd, 5th, 16th in his last 3 tournaments. That's going to go a long way. There are some negative marks when you look at him specifically for this course. He moves outside of the top 30. I think he's a safe target that I expect to make a cut. Him and Griffin were the 2 names that I tried to figure out if I wanted to bet either one of those 2 over McNeely and my second and third name that we're going to get to in a second. And I took McNeely, my second and third name, over those 2. But like, one of the things I've talked about, and I'll actually give you a perfect segue into this answer for your third choice, Byron. I have made an argument this week that Cameron Young, name recognition wise, is really garnering a lot of, I don't even want to say support. I mean, he is second in the betting board. I don't know where we're going to move matchup wise or his price in the outright market, but whether it's Matty Schmid, Ben Griffin, Harry Hall, JJ Spawn, Max Grazerman, I am looking to find ways to get a couple of those names against Cameron Young. I will let you talk about the positives in Cameron Young in 1 second. My negative that came into play with Cameron Young, and you very rarely see this with my model, I always talk about, usually the top of the board is pretty in unison to where I am, and a lot of times the big deviations for me, good and bad, are where I find my massive edges. And, you know, for here, this is going to be the deviation to where I just don't see the same outlook on Cameron Young as the rest of the space does. I think when we look at this tournament, one of the things, and you know, we can kind of already talked about it for the course, distance doesn't, while it's relevant here, I don't think off the tee play in general is quite as important. And while you're going to get that ability for him to show very valid proximity numbers, he loses some of that around the green strength that we've seen from him recently. And that putter becomes a massive problem. He's outside of the top 100 in a lot of those key critical areas of whether it's creating opportunities or the ability to make the putt. I don't necessarily know if I think Cameron Young is going to make or miss the cut here, but the way that I even phrase that answer here means that I believe it's closer to that being a real possibility than the market does. So I'm going to try to find a way to take him on. I will let you talk about the reasons why he's third in your model, but for me, at the way I've built my model right now, he is going to be the most significant fade candidate that I have on the board.
Yeah. I've changed his color to orange, even though he's third in my model. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm obsessed about the guy. There's a guy that I prefer instead of him, you know, and I think that's the way to go. One benefit that Cam Young does have is in my model, around the green, he's 60th in this field. You know, like we've mentioned, remove that, and we've got a off the tee where he's number 1, ball striking he's 4th, 16th on approach, and he's, you know, been finding some relative form with the putter to some extent. But I think I just don't trust this dude. if that's, you know, like, I think he's going to be a very popular play, and I will go to someone that's been playing routinely and regularly. What is he even doing out in Mexico? He's like one of the few guys that's inside the top 50 in FedEx Cup points that's actually playing out here. He's playing here again. I think he had a bogey-free round last year, and while I was to open up, and while I was looking at some stuff, I found a video of him in a press conference trying to figure out why he was at the tournament. After his round 1, he's like, yeah, I drove the ball great. That's really important around here. And I'm like, buddy,
he may have read my article from last year and gotten like a complete wrong breakdown of how to play this course, but I don't know. I agree. It's very questionable why he's here. To me, this is somebody searching for something at this moment at a course that in his mind, his driving distance is going to play as a benefit. I've talked about this before with Cameron Young. There are 2 things that really come into play. 1, I prefer him at difficult scoring courses. 2, I prefer him on courses where you have to club down a little bit. Neither one of those 2 things comes into play here. And even if you look at his result last year, he came in 54th place. I don't think he necessarily understood the concepts of how to play it. He's 109th in my model on slow greens putting. He's 107th in my model in high-end putting. He's 82nd when you just look at the recent results that he has put together in off-the-tee approach and putting. He's going to get better from some of his course-specific metrics just because he does have that upside with the driver, even if it's being mitigated somewhat in my sheet. And he does have that upside with some of the iron play. But I just don't think he either, one, gives himself enough opportunity to make putts, and two, like if he finds himself into the spot where he's not making putts, now all of a sudden there are real question marks that come into play here. So he's better than 50% to make the cut. I don't want to make that argument here, but this is a golfer for me that overall is 58th, upside is 72nd, and then some of the safety markets, which would be the cash games, some of the safer plays, he does start jumping up in my sheet, and there's a reason why he's priced the way he is, but massive concerns with what the actual upside is for him here.
Yes. And if you are a sicko like us and you're starting to track golf as the week goes along, I will share a screenshot with Cameron Young on a par 5 with Matt Gannon, and we will see Cameron Young doing some boneheaded thing on a par 5 at some point during this week. He makes a lot of birdies on par 5s, but he also he's like birdie average versus his scoring average is like 30 or 40 spots different, Spencer. He just blows up every now and then, and there's 4 par 5s that you have to get done around this golf course. So we've got a lot of negative things to say about Cameron Young. This is obviously going to end very well for both of us.
I don't know. I mean, I trust my numbers here, regardless of what happens here. He's 74th in my model in weighted par 5 scorings for all the reason that you've just talked about right there. You have to know what you're signing up for. And I'll move this into the JJ Spawn pick as I give this answer. But when you take stances in the market in any direction, you leave yourself susceptible for the good and the bad that comes into play with it. When you're not agreeing with the market, you're always putting yourself out there for it just to be different than everybody else. And, to me, I'm always trying to find those incongruities of the market in both directions here. So I think the incongruity on the one end is Cameron Young. On the other side of it with JJ Spawn, I bet him at 28-1 when he opened. This is a golfer, and I've talked about this before the FedEx Cup playoffs, and I've talked about it after the FedEx Cup playoffs. The statistics continue no matter where I try to look at it. If I look before, he's the number 1 player in expected off-the-tee approach plus putting. If I look over just the past handful of rounds, he's the number 1 player in those areas. When those statistics continue to be rendered by a golfer, to me, something usually has to give. You either have to start like really competing to win a golf tournament, or you have to go in the other direction to where you miss cuts and a lot of that was just fluff that was being put together. And when I look at JJ Spawn and what he has produced, like the 6th at the Zozo, great, but 34th at the Shriners, 25th at the Black Desert, 26 at the Pro Core. This has not been the greatest results from him as far as upside goes since this restart has occurred. I just think that we are much closer to that actually coming to fruition where he puts the pieces together. And that's one of the reasons why when he opened at 28-1, I thought the market was too low on him, because it was one of those situations to where I thought as an industry, too much was going into account of these 30th place finishes and not from the statistical data that we can really point towards here.
Let's go, baby. JJ Spawn, over the last little while, 27% of the time inside the top 20, 25% of the time inside the top 10, Spence. I've bet JJ Spawn for a top 10 at plus 240 this week. I love that bet. I think he's been doing the right things. We're just lacking a little bit of that like magic that you mentioned. He's also pretty crappy around the greens, so we're going to eliminate a big part of that game out of his situation. JJ Spawn plus 240 for a top 10. Spencer Aguiar has him as an outright at plus 2,800. Let's have a week. I love him, Spence. We both have him 5th and 3rd in the model. What is his DraftKings ranking over here? JJ Spawn for a DraftKings, he's 11th in pricing, so he's just outside the top 10. So we both have a significant edge on Mr. Spawnage. Let's see where we go with that. I'll let you speak about your second-ranked golfer over here.
Harry Hall continues to break my model a lot of these weeks. And the funny thing is at the Zozo Championship, I actually said that he was a golfer that I wasn't going to have much exposure towards. And I didn't play him for DFS, which ended up being a mistake. Sunday rolled around. I found an edge in the market where I bet Harry Hall in a round 4 matchup against Gary Woodland. The belief of that was that he had underperformed on the par 5s at a level that was much lower than where he should have been. He goes 6 under par on Sunday. He wins the matchup over Gary Woodland. But I think for me, a lot of times when you have these golfers that perform better than expectation inside of my model at a course that I didn't even necessarily love for them, there's a lot of intrigue that comes into play, because we look at courses that I have liked them at in Vegas. He was flirting towards the top of that leaderboard through different portions of that event and just could never quite put things together to get himself into real contention there. There are 6 categories that I ran this week. He's the only golfer that graded inside of the top 10 of all 6 of those categories. That is not an answer that I normally expect from Harry Hall. He had the overall build here to where if you gave me one name and told me who do I think is going to win this golf tournament regardless of price, I'm going to say Harry Hall here. And I know a lot of people saw that outright price in that 25 to 28 to 1 range and had a hard time stomaching that price. And I certainly understand that problem there. But whether it's him, Spawn, or McNeely, those were the names where I really wanted to shoot for upside. So those are my 3 outright bets. That's where I'm going to be trying to get a lot of exposure for DFS. I've already talked about I'm going to have 0% exposure to Cameron Young. So I kind of found myself, and it's really like even looking at your top 10, there you have a couple. I think Jonathan Vegas is in the 8,000s. You can tell me if anybody else that I'm missing, but like I kind of viewed this as a range where, as we get into this, and I'll just move into my number 1 player, I have Max Grazerman number 1. I think you have Grazerman. You have a bunch of options to consider in this $9,000 section. There were a name or 2 that I liked in the $8,000 range, but to me, I'm really trying to get up into that Harry Hall, JJ Spawn, Mav McNeely. If I can get up to Max Grazerman and make more of a build like that, just because I was much lower than consensus would be in the $8,000 section. Like I'm lower than you are on Jonathan Vegas, not like substantially so, but like he's outside of the top 30 for me. That's a noticeable difference there. Harris English fit the same mold there. Like there's a lot of players that I would just rather find a way to get $400, $500, $600 more expensive for win equity that almost doubles in my sheet, if we're being honest.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is like in a weird field like this, Spencer, it's kind of top heavy in a way. You can, if you're leaning into these guys in the 9Ks and leaving Cameron Young alone, who could be a quarter of the field owned, he has another dud of a week, kind of get the rust off. You never know, right? So one thing I do want to mention about Cameron Young, though, he is a sneaky first-round leader bet. I think if you do want to get any exposure to him, he's a great first-round leader guy. In my 2-hole, I have got the one, the only, the ball-striking savant, Mr. Thomas Hoagie. Again, another guy, struggles around the greens. Remove that entirely from he's one of the best iron players. I think he's going to give himself a multitude of birdie putts this week. So I'll be betting him at top 20 again at plus 120, 110, wherever you can find that. I think Tom Hoagie is the guy. He's also one of these dudes that does not like to get himself inside the top 10 at all. And I don't like that my model has him second, because it suggests that he likes to live inside the top 10. But maybe I need to kind of lean into him a little bit in the DFS side of things in case he does do that for some reason. I think he's going to be very under-owned again this week, Spencer. For some weird reason, he wasn't that owned in Japan, struggled in Japan, and also struggled at the Shriners. So had a good performance, I believe, at the Pro Core, the Sandersons, where he did cash that top 20. So I'm expecting him to bounce back. He's been my guy. I'm either going to bleed Tom Hoagie dry in the top 20 market, or we're going to keep going to town. I'll also be playing him quite intensely at $8,300. I feel like that's a solid price point for him.
Hoagie's probably one of my preferred options in the $8,000 range. To me, this is where market overcorrection has occurred to some extent with him. Fourth in my model, when using a weighted approach, trying to find upside climbers for this course, a lot of that comes down to the proximity play and the ability for him to make putts from a lot of the distances that I'm looking for. Boom or bust, a lot of these names that we keep highlighting as our plays that we are kind of sticking our neck out on the line a little bit in those ranges. But I also liked Hoagie. He just missed the top 10 for me. He was 15th, but when I ran it for upside, he was as close to the top 10 as I could get. So I like your viewpoint of trying to push it up the board with him, which is against the grain of what you normally expect from Tom Hoge with a lot of these production. And I think that's why this is actually a good bet in that position there. The floor is going to be low. The ceiling is going to be higher. He hasn't performed recently. The statistics from a short-term perspective are not going to necessarily look good, but all of a sudden, if you weigh the data the way that you need it for this course, big climber for me in my sheet. So Hoge is a very nice name to consider for DFS, I think.
Yeah, baby. Love a good sign-off like that. As we get to my final guy, drop any questions you guys have. We're going to get to the Q&A portion of the show. Probably should have mentioned that to you guys a little sooner, but we are willing to answer any and all questions you have about golf or anything else. If you're in that kind of mood, it is the fall swing. We don't really care what you ask us, but feel free to throw in some good questions about any DFS options that you may or may not have. I'm highlighting a completely wrong box over here as we go along. Let's highlight my guy, Max Griesemann. Over at Bet365, I popped it in the Rotoballer Discord this morning. There's a 28-1 with 3 places on him, which I love. Like, that to me is the Max Griesemann bet, because we've got 3 second-place finishes in his last 5 starts. This guy's balling out, and he is a putter, man. This guy is he's like Cam Smithy. He is a consistently good putter. He was making putts after putts. I didn't watch the end of the Sunday round, but he got himself into the mix in Zozo because of the putter. And I feel like he can kind of lean on that the lack of accuracy he may have at this venue also kind of leans away. He is the favorite guy in the field. I've gone after these dudes at the top now the last 2 tournaments. I'm kind of feeling like a square. But hey, I found a nice number in a weird way. So if he finishes top 3 and doesn't win this week, I mean, what? It's I think it was a quarter or a fifth of the odds. So you get, 3 plus 350 or something like that. Or if you want to bet him top 5 at Bet365, he's plus 350 for a top 5. So that to me also checks out as a solid bet. Griesemann's obviously paying off big time in that top 5 market right now with his last run of results. So there's ways to go about it if you're not in the mood to bet him outright. I do believe that top 5 bet is something I'd make if I didn't have the each way on him already. So I would advocate for that too, Spence. I think it's time, man. He's been, there's so many golfers that win tournaments after they've been finishing second. And I mean, he's now very comfortable, you'd imagine, with being in contention at least, right? After the Wyndham, all of that, played quite nicely. I mean, he's playing with the 2 inevitable winners with Justin Thomas. He's doing some good things now. And I feel like in this field, Nico Echeverria is in it, but I don't know if he's going to win it again. So love Max Griesemann, 28-1 over there at Bet365 with 3 places each way. So go for that if you guys are in that kind of a space. All right. We'll get into some gourmet and Craig kind of takes as we go along here now. Let's take a quick peek at the branding over here so I can get us going down the board. There we go. That's the wrong one. We're still learning some stuff here. There we go. Okay. So, folks, drop the names of any golfers you want us to answer questions about. We are in the mood, as Darbo says over here at Q&A. Byron, how do we feel about the okay? I did say you can ask us anything but the Jets is on the table. So we'll continue the show. Yeah, Spence, let's dive into any 8K guys that you're kind of in the mood for. We would have touched on favorites in the 9s and 10s throughout the top 10 there. Who in the 8s, if anybody that you haven't mentioned, are you still kind of eyeing out as we go out of here?
Hoge makes sense for all the reasons I talked about. The other 2 that I wrote about in my DraftKings article, Sam Stevens, Matt Kuchar. Those were 2 names that had value in my model this week. The negative, which would be the cray part of this answer, I'm going to go opposite of you, Byron. I'm going to say Jonathan Vegas is cray, and I'm going to say Taylor Moore is also cray here.
Okay. Hey, man, that's fine. I do believe Johnny Vegas, he's a boom or bust guy, so if you want to be out on him, that's not going to be a bad thing either. So
my concern for Vegas beyond anything else, and we do this show on Monday and there's a lot of unknown variables. I am afraid that Vegas is going to be uber popular. Okay. I might be wrong on that take. And if we get here on Wednesday and he's sub 10%, obviously that I want to call it hatred towards him. think the only player that has hatred for me this week seems to be Cameron Young with all the stuff I talked about him. But it's going to come down to ownership. And my guess is he's going to be a top 10 owned player. And when my model's already lower on him, I would rather just have him beat me.
Yes. Again, all of what we said already is just in a vacuum without kind of ownership anticipation there. If he's high owned, I will be out on Jonathan Vegas. I do not think his boom or bust mentality is someone you want to be chalky with. My guy that I'm going to be mentioning as a cray option for an upside ranking, Matt Kuchar at $8,500 is 40th for me in my model. It might have to do with a weird par 5 ranking I have for him there too. But I think, he's been playing fine, but just hardly ever finds himself sitting inside the top 5 as much as I'd like. I'm going to be going with him. And then again, Taylor Moore, like you mentioned, Spence, he was the bane of my existence because I never had him in round 1 showdown when I had Bo Hossler miss a 4-foot putt for birdie that cost me $450 at like 2:00 on a Thursday night. Then you got to go into work the next day. You didn't win the $450 additional dollars you thought you were going to win, and also just hate Bo Hossler for the whole day as Phoebe's mowing down on a chipmunk over here. Rico Hoey is someone that I will be looking at $8,200 as well. I think he's a very sneaky option down here. He's been trending in the right direction. I'll take a chance on him as a bit of a gut play in the 8s.
Really
in the
quickly,
7s, yeah.
Really quickly, Byron. I don't think you probably happened to see this, but at the Zozo Championship, I had Seamus Power over Taylor Moore in a matchup on round 3. Did you happen to see how that finished?
No.
So Seamus Power was up like 4 or 5 strokes most of that back 9. Seamus goes double bogey on the 2 par 5s, the easiest hole, but he enters 18 up 2 strokes on Taylor Moore. So he double bogeys 18. Taylor Moore hits it to about 3 feet for birdie and missed the putt. So the bet ended up pushing. So I don't know if that was the greatest push I've ever had or the worst push I've ever had. I guess it depends on which way you look at it. But Taylor Moore seems to, for the most part, I understand he missed there, so maybe things have turned around. He has also been the bane of my existence in a lot of these spots. I have faded him a lot recently at courses where he has substantial results at, and he continues to gain 6+ strokes a tournament. It's been one of the strangest outcomes of it.
And that's one of the worst parts about going against him in like a day-by-day matchup, because that putter, just he was a first-round leader after round 1 at the Zozo and was gaining like a stroke ball striking. Like it was all the short game, like chipped in for eagle, had a random streak. He made so many 13-foot par saves down the stretch, bro. I was tilting over that stuff. But Mike H, not tilting, asking some good questions about leaning into putting here this week. We mentioned that in the beginning of the show, Spence, but what do you want to add on to that for Mike?
Massive, probably one of the bigger weights that I've put on both weighted proximity and high-end proximity of what I'm looking for and that putting statistics. So yeah, putting is going to be something that I'm weighing heavily in my model this week.
Yes. And if there is one part of putting, Spencer, would you say 5 to 15 feet is a range that you're kind of looking at as a way more predictable metric, because things can get a little wonky the further away from a hole you go?
I think it matters a little bit on both ends of the spectrum. Like from the 5 to 15 feet is obviously where you're trying to make the putt. But when you have these really big green complexes and the slow pass volume that you're going to get, I do think there's something to be said about 25+ feet, just because you're going to have the opportunities to actually create a score and create a birdie. But there's going to be a lot of opportunities on the other end of it to where you're going to be 47 feet away and you have these really slow surfaces that you're going to have to traverse. And it's carpet-like, it's pretty pure, but at the end of the day, it's slow, and slow is a lot different for some of these players. They don't get it there. They overhit it. So I think I'm going to be looking at both ends of the spectrum there, just for different ways. One to actually produce a score, the other one to just make sure we get ourselves in safely with a par, because we can't have errors that accumulate.
No, you don't want to be 3-putting at all this week. Like that's not what's on the cards. We got to be holing 40-footers, baby. So in the 7, Spencer, I like Arsene Eckroat quite a lot this week. Grades out quite nicely for the comp courses that we spoke about. Henrik Norlander is a gourmet kind of option for me as well. He's known as the Paspalum Prince, as we know in this industry. Plays fantastic golf on that kind of grass for old Norlander there. And then Justin Lower, another great guy that grades out quite nicely for me on comps, as well as a solid finish here last year. And then I'm going to just take a flyer. And this is like we're getting into this range. I'm not going to lean as much into my model as I do at the top of the board there, because these guys are also damn volatile down here. Michael Kim had an incredible final round at the Shriners. Who the heck knows? Maybe he found something. He has got decent upside. We've seen him play nicely in these big events. Last year, kind of lost his way a touch lately. So maybe he's found a new groove and going there. Another bet that I'm going to be making and will be playing is a Hayden Springer, top 10. He has been playing some really solid golf. I think 3 of his last 8 starts have been top 10 finishes at, I believe, the Farm, the John Deere, the Rocket, and maybe the Sandersons or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but we have got a Hayden Springer guy that loves to find himself inside the top 10. He's plus 600 over at Bet365 for a top 10 bet. He hasn't ever finished inside the top 5 in the last 12 months, but he's done a top 10 in 3 of his last 8. So I like to see that from a guy. I mean, he's got as many top 10s as he has top 20s. So that's a situation where I'll kind of lean into that top 10 a little bit more than a top 20 bet. So any other names in the 7, Spence, that you're in the mood to gourmet and cray about?
Chandler Phillips, Nick Hardy, talked about Daniel Berger,
Yes.
Patton Kazire, Carson Young, Bud Cauley. Those are all names that are on my short list of options I'm going to be considering this week. I think on the cray part of it, we see a course that's so wide open, and I think more people are going to play Cameron Champ because of that reason. I'm probably going to be off of Cameron Champ, but yeah, as far as Springer goes, he is an extremely, and I see this in my model. It's really interesting because I actually didn't know that you were on him in any capacity. And one of the things that when I was building my model that I saw pop to the forefront of it is some of the prerequisites that I was looking for par 4 scoring, and then also the par 5 scoring. He had the ability, more so than most of these players in this range, to pop for that, almost 59 that Darbo just talked about that can come into fruition at any point. I do worry about him a little bit this week. It's much different when we're talking about a top 10 sort of bet at 6-1 because you're betting on that upside there. But I do think that if we look at the actual courses recently that he's produced some of his results at, to me, it's a little bit opposite of what we're getting here. That would be my only concern. But a golfer for me, that was a value at 7,100, a golfer that had upside marks on those critical par 4s and par 5s that can get hot at any given point. So if I'm playing him, I'm playing him as a top 10. If he gets popular for DFS, I'm probably going to be sitting out on it regardless of him being a value. But he was one of the couple of names that it was really, I almost expected at a given point when I was building my model that there was a chance he might enter the top 20 or 25 of my model. And he ended up moving in the other direction through the last 40% of the weights that I put into it, but still was a top 40 player for me.
Yeah, baby. Let's go. I love that. And I also have a Carson Young top 20 bet at plus 250, by the way, people. He's a really solid option inside the top 20 there, finishing inside the top 20, about 1 every 4 starts over the last 12 months. For me, grades out incredibly well on some comp courses. Spencer, the bottom of the barrel of a golf course and a golf field that is nasty. What are we kind of stomaching in the 6Ks over here going into the WWT Championship?
I mean, to answer Darbo's question very quickly, I could see Springer. I think him, Carson Young, Alex Smalley, maybe Henrik Norlander, Joe Highsmith. These are names that are at least trending in this direction right now, that they're going to be the most popular options that are at 7,500 or less. I mean, if he gets to that 8, 9, 10% range, that's too much for me for the volatility that he possesses. I don't really, if I'm being honest with you, Byron, have much of a take in the $6,000 section right now. I posted my model in my Rotoballer article of the options that were a value for me. There were, a handful that looked somewhat interesting, but at the end of the day, I'd like to see where ownership lands. Brandon Wu would technically be the best value that I had in the sheet. It was a high upside, low floor sort of a play with him. But there's a lot of gross names that we could get to here. I guess the other one that I would like to point out, because it was at least the upside mark caught me somewhat by surprise for a golfer that was outside of the top 85 for me for safety. Troy Merritt did climb inside of the top 35 for upside. So, I mean, look, you got to know what you're signing up for here. It's a 120-man field. Some of these names, though, to me, were too negatively weighted for the form that they had produced. Merritt might be one of those options if there's belief that he fits this course better than some of those results. But it gets gross quickly, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I even talked about at the beginning. At a tournament that is watered down, that's going to get to 27 under par, I'm still taking 3 sub 28 to 1 options. So with that reasoning, it kind of means that a lot of these names further down the board, I'm going to be lower on.
Exactly. And I think that's fair to understand. And going back to what Darbo mentioned about the ownership, it's a 120-man field. They've got a bunch of random people in here. Let's call it a 110-man field. The ownership is going to be significantly, well, not significantly, slightly higher than normal. Some, just because of the lack of volume of clicks available. So anything south of 10% for me is fine. I really like what he's up, but also 10% is probably too much. Probably less than 7.6 would be a nice number there. Sam Ryder, David Lipsky, 2 names at $6,800 that I wouldn't mind going to in that department. Tom Whitney at $6,400, also another option that you could potentially look into if you're in the mood for a cheap value play that played quite nicely at some comp courses over there. So awesome stuff, folks. We are out of here because Joe Idoni is going live in 1 minute over at Preferred Lines and on our Rotoballer X page. So we got to get out of here. We really appreciate you all for tuning in. Hit that like button on the way out. Subscribe to Rotoballer PGA. And use code TOFF or code MANIAC for 10% off and all the things we got over there for you guys. So we appreciate you guys. Spence, get us out of here.
We have a lot of exciting stuff. Like I know you and I specifically have been brainstorming for different ideas that we can bring over to Rotoballer for the year 2025. There's a lot on tap, so be sure to keep an eye out on that. And just thank you to everybody who tunes into the show, anybody who subscribes to Rotoballer, anybody who just writes Byron and I and just wants to have a conversation. Without you guys, we couldn't do what we do. So thank you to everybody out there. Good luck this week. And it's going to be a fun tournament, I think, regardless of everything that we've talked about of the course. For DFS, there's always an edge to be had.
We're all in this together, folks. So we'll catch you guys next week. Peace.